why is a little country called Yemen important? And why does the U.S. Navy send an aircraft carrier, the USS Theodore Roosevelt, along with other ships to stop Iran from beefing up the armament of the radical Muslims in Yemen? What is the deal? Well, we're going to tell you more about it on this show. Here's Wendy.
The action comes while the president is trying to finish up a nuclear deal with Iran, but now some Republicans say that deal should be tied to the Americans imprisoned in Iran, including Pastor Saeed Abedini. Dale Hurd has the story.
The Pentagon has ordered the USS Theodore Roosevelt to head to the Gulf of Aden off the coast of Yemen. The aircraft carrier will join other American ships ready to stop illegal Iranian weapons shipments to rebels fighting in Yemen's civil war.
We have seen evidence that the Iranians are supplying weapons and other forms of support to the Houthis in Yemen. That's the kind of support that will only contribute to greater violence in that country.
Just last September, President Obama called Yemen a success story in the war on terror. Now, if Iranian-backed rebels aren't defeated, Yemen could become an even bigger base for terrorist attacks against the United States. Iran's role in aiding a rebel army next door to Saudi Arabia shows that it is a regional threat to peace, and that could make it even less likely Congress will support the president's nuclear deal with Iran, a deal that's already facing serious troubles on Capitol Hill.
I think Barack Obama's deal is deteriorating before our eyes.
In fact, some Republicans want to link the Iran nuclear deal with Americans the Iranians are holding in prison, including Washington Post reporter Jason Rezaian and Christian pastor Saeed Abedini. Iran is also holding and has reportedly tortured former U.S. Marine Amir Hekmati. Jordan Sekulow, executive director of the American Center for Law and Justice, said, "It is critical that our government use this unique opportunity to bring Pastor Saeed and the other wrongfully imprisoned Americans home to their families." When asked why the White House can't tie the nuclear talks with Iran to the release of prisoners like Rezaian and Pastor Abedini, spokesman Josh Earnest said the talks are very complicated and must focus on one issue at a time. But that makes it even harder for Congress to approve any deal with Iran. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Talks are complicated because the president is rolling over on every single charge the old man makes. The Ayatollah asks for whatever he wants, and Obama gives it to him. I want to show you a map. I think it's important to understand Yemen. Now, you see, on the one hand, you have Iran, and you have the Persian Gulf, and you have Kuwait, the Emirates, and all those other, Abu Dhabi, et cetera, all those countries that produce oil. And most of that oil goes through what's called the Straits of Hormuz, which is dominated by Iran. It goes right through. There's a tiny little area, and Iran can interdict that anytime it wants to. Now, Saudi Arabia is the biggest producer of crude oil. The tip of Saudi Arabia is Yemen, and you go up into the Red Sea, into the Suez Canal. That's how the other oil goes to Europe. It goes through the Suez, or it would come out the Persian Gulf and then back into the Bab el-Mandeb and up into the Suez Canal. So Europe is dependent on these two bodies of water, and on the right-hand side of Yemen there, that's where we've sent aircraft carrier and battle group, and the Iranians are sending. Now, are we going to have a clash? The Saudis are already bombing with aircraft the Houthi rebels. It's a volatile situation, and it's the thing of it is Sunni versus Shia, and when that thing explodes, it could lead the Middle East to a violent, vicious war, and the prize would be oil, but it would also be dominance. Who's going to be dominant? Will it be Iran, or will it be Saudi, Kuwait, and the other Sunnis? Big deal. And the president has kind of been yawning, and now that Josh Earnest, you just stand in amazement at how they're doing. But that's the game. 60-65% of all the world's oil come through those little waterways. Europe depends on it. The United States used to, until we started all this fracking and bringing gas and oil out of the shale. But, ladies and gentlemen, geopolitically, Iran wants to dominate that area, and that's why. So there could be an actual clash between Iranian ships and Saudi and American ships. Amazing, isn't it? Well, in other news, just a few years ago, he was the leader of Egypt, and he was a favorite of the United States White House. Now, he's going to prison. John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. Here's John.
That's right, Pat. Mohammed Morsi, the ousted Islamic Egyptian president, has been sentenced to 20 years in prison. The sentence stems from violence outside the presidential palace in 2012, in which Morsi supporters attacked opposition protesters, sparking clashes that killed at least 10 people. This is the first verdict to be issued against Morsi. He and thousands of other members of the Muslim Brotherhood are set to face more trials after the military overthrew Morsi in 2013. Well, as relations between the U.S. and Cuba begin to thaw, a surprising spiritual reality is emerging. The church in Cuba is thriving. As Heather Sells reports, Baptists, Assemblies of God, and other denominations are reporting amazing growth.
Despite opposition and incredible poverty, the church in Cuba is exploding. In the past 20 years, Baptist churches have grown from several hundred to more than 7,000. Assemblies of God churches once numbered less than 100, and now more than 10,000 are proclaiming the gospel.
The church not only survived, but in the midst of those pressures and difficulties, it grew. It grew solid.
At the core of Cuba's church growth is house churches across the island. That is because back in the 1990s, the Cuban government told churches they could no longer build buildings. The net effect was that church growth became very, very easy as Christians simply began meeting in their homes. CBN News producer and Latin American expert Stan Jeter recently visited Cuba on a missions trip and explains the phenomenon.
Since they didn't have to focus on building a church or having a property, they were free to just go ahead and evangelize and start meeting in someone else's home.
Believe it or not, many also think that Cuba's poverty has fueled its church growth. With many Cubans existing on less than $30 a month, there's simply not the money to pursue entertainment, hobbies, or other pursuits that would pull them from the gospel.
One church leader told me that is one of the reasons that church members spend so much time in church activities. They can spend more time evangelizing their neighbors because they're not distracted by a lot of material goods.
Church leaders say one fruit of all this growth is an emerging missions movement in Cuba. Hundreds of believers are considering or planning to head overseas as missionaries. And given their single-minded focus and long-term experience with hardship, they may be uniquely qualified to travel to new lands to spread the gospel. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Thanks, Heather. Pat, that's some exciting new developments.
You persecute the church, and look what happens. It happens over and over again. The blood of the martyrs of the seedbed of the church. Stan Jeter, by the way, I believe grew up in Cuba. He speaks Spanish fluently, and he does our world news. He does a superb job. He's been on the mission field for CBN for decades, and I know he's thrilled at what's happening in Cuba. John?
Pat, here at home, Hillary Clinton is on the campaign trail. Critics say Clinton and her staff have largely avoided the news media after questions about her email controversy as Secretary of State, and now a new book called Clinton Cash about the Clinton Foundation's finances and possible favors in return. But one reporter did manage to ask Mrs. Clinton a tough question about that new book. Clinton called it a distraction.
You know, those issues are, in my view, distractions from what this campaign should be about, what I'm going to make this campaign about, and I'll let other people decide what they want to talk about. I'm going to talk about what's happening in the lives of the people of New Hampshire and across America. Thank you all.
But the financial questions aren't likely to go away. The book has already caused a major stir in political circles, and major news organizations will be following up on the story. Well, authorities in Italy have arrested the captain of that migrant boat that capsized off the coast of Libya. The Tunisian man now faces multiple reckless homicide charges. Up to 900 people were killed in the shipwreck, which may be the deadliest migrant tragedy ever. Even as the search for victims continues, Coast Guard ships rushed to respond to 3 other distress calls. European leaders are struggling to respond to an increased flow of migration and instability in Libya, which is encouraging human traffickers. Pat?
You know, it's understood that in one of those ships, in any event, the holes were locked, and many of those migrants were locked and could not get out when the ships began to sink. It was a horrible tragedy, and that man should face the stiffest penalties that they have in the Italian courts. Where did all this come from? Libya used to be a very prosperous country. Mohammed Gaddafi, I know, was a terrible dictator, but nevertheless, the country was fairly stable and prosperous. And Gaddafi had agreed to give up his nuclear ambitions and to play nice. So suddenly he's overthrown, and the United States, it was leading from behind and all that other stuff that went on. We let it happen. Libya failed. Now it is a breeding ground for terror. Al-Qaeda has come into Libya, and ISIS is, doing terrible things, capturing Libyan Christians and executing them. Some of the horrible horrors come out of that. The U.S. is responsible for that stuff. We have allowed it to happen on our watch, and then we see terrible, shocking pictures of chemical attacks by the Syrian regime against their own people. And Obama said, the line in the sand is chemicals. When he uses chemicals, that's it, I'm going after him. He did no such thing. And Assad still reigns supreme in Syria. The country is in tatters. And because of that chaos, ISIS has gained a foothold and taken over a good part of Syria, and now taking over a good part of Iraq. They have just taken over Ramadi, the capital of the Anbar province. So many of our servicemen gave their lives for that. Martin Dempsey said, oh, well, it's not a big deal. It wasn't really strategically important. And one mother of a dead Marine says, how could you desecrate the memory of my son with such a statement? Well, that's the kind of thing we've got running our country. It just makes you sick at your stomach. But folks, pray for an intervention from God Almighty. Well, now there's something else happening, and we all watched in horror as a bomb went off at the Boston Marathon. Now that Tsarnaev is one of the guys was killed, the brother, and another brother is facing trial. They're calling for the death penalty. Here's John.
That's right, Pat. Today, jurors in that Boston Marathon bombing trial will start deliberating if Dzhokhar Tsarnaev will face the death penalty or get life in prison. It's been 2 years since the bombings that killed 3 people and wounded more than 260. Rebecca Gregory was one of the 16 bombing victims to lose a limb.
There's life after bad things that happen to you, and if I can be someone's hope or inspiration, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life.
Earlier this month, the jury found Tsarnaev guilty of all 30 charges against him. His lawyers are expected to continue arguing he doesn't deserve the death penalty. They say the 19-year-old was heavily influenced by his older brother at the time of the attack. Pat?
You know, you put him in jail on a life sentence. So who is bearing the penalty? Not Tsarnaev, no. The people of Boston. They've got to pay the bill for that sucker to stay in jail for the next 50, 60, 70 years. How old will he be? He could live to be 100. He could be another 80 years. Who knows? If there was ever a time that the death penalty is appropriate, it is in relation to that butcher. So what he did to those people is appalling. And it isn't just kids' games, and say he was influenced by his brother. Tough luck. He was old enough to know right from wrong. John?
Pat, the eyes of Congress are on the military as it has been giving some of its more conservative Orthodox chaplains a hard time. Paul Strand reports on one lawmaker who has a deeply personal interest in the treatment of military chaplains.
Chaplains like Navy Lieutenant Commander Wes Motter have been facing flack for counseling or preaching in ways faithful to their more orthodox denominations, but not so pleasing to more liberal, politically correct elements in today's military. So they've been threatened with damaging reports in their file or even possible discharge from the ranks.
What the military needs to realize, and these embattled chaplains need to know, is that Congress has their back, as we found here in Gainesville, Georgia, when speaking with Republican Congressman Doug Collins, himself a military chaplain.
There seems to be an oversensitivity to the true religious freedoms that each service member can have, whether they have faith or no faith, and chaplains are there to provide for all. And yet it seems like that every turn there's been more of a cracking down on those with faith in ways that are not proselytizing, not anything outside their normal realm of what they should be allowed to do.
Collins says pushing around chaplains could well get the military in trouble with the legislators who pass the defense budgets and laws meant specifically to protect service members' religious liberties.
It's time that they actually live up to their own standards. They actually live up to what the doctrines that they put out on religious freedom and religious accommodation. It's not good that the military would be doing anything to interfere with that. So I think they just need to watch, do what they're supposed to be doing, do what Congress has said, and I think they'll be okay.
Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from Gainesville, Georgia.
Thanks, Paul. Severe storms on the East Coast has made life difficult for more than 50 million people. From Florida to New York, thunderstorms, high winds, and hail have disrupted both traffic and pedestrians. In Atlanta, one woman died after a tree crashed into her house. The rain has caused flash flooding in some areas. And in Alabama, winds were so strong they blew trains off the tracks. This particular weather system has produced more than 400 severe weather reports since the weekend. Well, get ready for a whole new type of password for your computer and online activities. A PayPal executive is suggesting a new system where devices are injected or embedded into the body. The Wall Street Journal reports those devices could include brain implants and attachable computers. PayPal's Jonathan LeBlanc says new technology has taken a huge leap forward to what he calls true integration with the human body. For example, he tells the Journal that thin silicon chips can be embedded into the skin for an accurate way to prove your identity. LeBlanc says PayPal isn't necessarily thinking about adopting these ideas and that it will be some time before all of this becomes reality. Pat, I don't know about you, but I think I'd rather stick with the traditional password.
I just don't want a chip in my brain. Maybe it'll make me smarter. That wouldn't hurt. I wouldn't mind the bionic thing. But isn't that what the Bible says? You can't buy or sell without the mark of the beast. Well, how'll it be? A little chip. These chips are so sophisticated, they can have your entire credit history, your entire financial data, everything about you, and they can all be put in a little teeny tiny chip into your hand, and then it can be updated as you spend and what have you. And you can't buy or sell without that. You go in and I want groceries. Well, let me, scan your hand. I want gas in the, filling station. Scan your hand. I want to buy a car. Scan your hand. Buy a house. Scan it. How's your credit? It's so simple now. It didn't used to be. It was impossible. What was in Revelation was a fantasy. Now it's reality, and it's a scary reality. Wendy?
I think with all the computer hacking and people worried about their security, we're going to end up going there because people are going to say, oh, well, I'd rather have my password secure and not have my computer hacked into.
You'd be available. Some of these things, by the way, you can get a reader if you're walking along with a cell phone. Somebody can get a reader and read what you've got going. And I know years ago, I did a political thing, and we were afraid that our headquarters was being hacked, so we hired a firm to come check. The firm set up a van outside the office building where we were, and they accessed every computer in the building.
Wow.
Turned them on, off, gave them commands, and you think, dear me, they can do that now? And, we wanted to be real careful. We weren't talking too near a window because they have microphones that are sensitive to the vibration of glass. Mm-hmm. So if you're talking near a window, it can pick it up. Oh,
scary.
Big brother, but God is bigger, and I'm not worried about it.